Thank you so much, David. And now I will ask all the presenters to come and sit here. And now we need the, I, yeah, what is Ravit? You can come. Okay. So thank you for three wonderful presentations. It was like a single moment for me. And the stage is open for question, please.
Thank you for a wonderful session. I would dare saying that I perceive certain different nuances, to say the least, in the narratives of those scholars who are not permanent Israeli residents from those who are permanent Israeli residents. The framework is quite different, and I'm particularly interested in that, and I wanted to ask a question to both, to some extent similar, although the questions in the end are somewhat different. And so the question to Professor Metaferia is beyond what you have uncovered. Did you get into a sense of what there is one particular dimension that I didn't hear so much, and that's kind of the political opinions and attitudes of these people, especially the younger, since you said a lot about the younger generation. Now, we live in a state of Israel which is a buoyant polity. You know, you cannot escape. And so so we, the veterans, have a certain sense of the options and the anti-options. What is your insight in what's in the mind of these, especially younger people, in terms of the, I mean, beyond of the generic discourse about integration and rights, but then what's next? What kind of ideal state? And to some extent, although it is different, the question is to you, because once we have been seeing a wonderful set, a typology of different persons, but then in the end, it is one case. It is one case of a group which is basically unjustly discriminated and marginalized. But if we try now to get the different voices of these people and then try to expand kind of, if not typology, a range, a broader range of ideals, of suggestions, of proposals, of futures that they would have in mind, if you can help.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so they will answer and then we'll look for more.
Yes, I did discuss about the political philosophy, the political view of the young. There is generational difference. The older people are more or less status quo oriented. They feel that they owe the government that is in power, that is in power, and so there is a loyalty. And while the younger ones are very pushy, want change, and want to have a say in the political system. They are not going with the grain of the political situation. They want to change. They want to change in their own way. Yes, I discussed one thing. One weak point in the community is that there is no solidarity. It is a divided, it's a fragmented society. There is no monolithic unity in the system. And they also believe that, the committee believes that the different political parties also fragment them. They don't want to come together, they don't want to coalesce. So there is this division within the system, within the community. And so they don't have a single, such as a community, as a larger community. They don't have a single political view. They are divided between the older and the younger ones. The older ones are status quo oriented. They feel grateful to the state of Israel and to the political system, and they want to accept that. While the younger generation want to challenge it. They want to change the status quo. They want to be part of it. And so they are very dynamic. Younger people are very dynamic. And so they want to change the political game as well in their own way. So this is something that I found. Hopefully on Thursday, I'm going to meet some of these people that I'm going to talk with. One of the weaknesses is that, the fragmentation within the society. This past election, political leaders who are running for office who were Ethiopians, the Beta Israelis, were very much frustrated with what was going on. They say they are contributing to this community, but the community does not support them. Outsiders are coming, buying them with money, maybe buying them with promises that will not be delivered. So these are the contentious issues that I saw in the community. No, there is no unity, there is no solidarity, fragmentation, and the other groups also capitalize on this fragmentation. So the thinking within the community, especially the younger ones, is how they can forge one kind of united front, and so that they can be viable alternative. That's one thing. Another thing is that Beit Israeli political candidates want to get vote from the Beit Israeli community. But the younger people say that, no, we have not to be taken for granted. These political leaders have to earn it, and they have to show on track that they support the community, not only when election comes, and they come and promise, and they disappear. So they are looking into different aspects. These are the general discussions that I found. I hope it answered. Sure.
Thank you so much for your question. You know, it's something that I think about a lot in terms of, my apologies. Thank you so much for your question. It's something that I think about a lot in terms of the arc of how I wanted to develop this project, to the extent that, well, a few things I want to kind of throw out there. You know, I think Israel really is a kind of proverbial old, new land in a lot of regards. And as a new land and as a new nation, I think that there are certain instantiations in which it struggles with like the idea of citizenship for its own citizens, right? So just all the ways in which marriage is very complicated for even just simply like white heterosexual Israelis, I think like shows the questions and the challenges of like citizenship in Israel. One of the examples I brought up was like the Surrogacy Act, and that basically same-sex couples are banned from you know, having children like via surrogacy or via surrogates. I think that this issue of refugees, this issue of African refugees, is like a particularly kind of uncanny and trenchant one, as I mentioned, also in a nation or in a land of refugees in a lot of regards. And so I think with some of the highlighting of how I phrase it, like the citizen, non-citizen, by the non-citizen, the kind of refugee, I think it highlights the ways in which citizenship is kind of uncertain even for Israelis themselves. So where I want to take this project, or kind of where I think we need to think about like what will be done with this situation, is to consider that several years ago, after the completion of the Sinai-Israel barrier, basically it's been a complete halt to any further refugees entering the country. However, there are 35,000, approximately, like currently here, and in a really kind of, complicated and beautiful way, you are starting to see African refugees and Israeli citizens starting families and having children. And I think that this emblems a moment for Israel to avoid the problem that South Africa faced with like the colored class of people. Because what's going to begin to happen is, without reconciling this problem of refugees in the society, you're going to give like birth basically to these half citizen, half non-citizen identities of mixed race, probably light-skinned, biracial, binational citizens who emblem just the kind of inherent complications of this situation. So to think that perhaps an Israeli mother would be able to confer like citizenship or even like Judaism to her like biracial African refugee child clearly evidences how this idea of citizenship has to be fixed, because that's a obviously fraught dynamic. And I point to the formation of families and the future of this demographic, because after April, or I guess it was like April 1st. It was April Fool's Day in the United States, and I read the news that Netanyahu had agreed to let half of the refugees go to Western country and half kind of be resettled, and then in like not even a day,
Yeah, we remember.
he caved. I love Bibi as much as the next person, but he caved, right, to his kind of general like right-wing forces, and reneged that ambiguously defined offer anyway. So why, if the refugees are supposed to be so rejected, why are they being forced to stay? Which is why I highlighted the kind of liminal nature of it. And irrespective of kind of the like philosophical and kind of like ontological ideas of like liminality in space, they're here. They're here, and they're going to start having like wonderful families with Israelis, and this issue of citizenship is just going to be highlighted as more and more complicated. And I think that why this issue is so interesting for me was really with regard to some of my own personal reconciliations with, so cheesy, I dreamed of coming to Israel my entire life, finally came in 2015, and it really like did fulfill all of like my hopes and expectations, and it was as special and wonderful as I imagined it would be and I wanted it to be. However, I identify as Black, I identify as a lot of things. However, as a Black person, when you come to Tel Aviv and you just see other Black people as refugees cleaning your toilet, doing the dishes in the back, homeless in Levinsky Park, it's something. It's something to me. As I said, my response to your question is actually just like kind of to think about like the complications of like the future, because South Africa fell into a further pit when it like kind of almost invented this colored class of people who lacked a certain citizenship, and Israel is right at that precipice. So avoid falling off of the cliff. Don't necessarily follow all of South Africa's, because they're not.
Actually, thank you very much, Professor Getachew. I have maybe a comment on an idea. When we are talking about Ethiopian Jews in Israel, we are talking actually about specific group. But nowadays, it is not a specific group. And we are talking about Ethiopia and Israel, there is something behind. And the teenagers, I think that deal with daily life in Israel, it's not only between Ethiopia, Israel, and maybe reggae and rap. There are some like globalization aspects, and Teddy Afro and Esther, that they are part of Ethiopia and they grow up in Ethiopia, they live in the United States, and they go all over the world. And I think that maybe we need to take a look outside from the situation of Israel and Ethiopia and see what's going on all over the world with teenagers or with identity in global point of view, and not only the Israeli issue. And I think the atmosphere of the dialogue right now, it's part of atmosphere that what's going on with other groups in Israel too, not only in a global or all over the world, but in Israel too. There are teenagers from different parts of Israel, new immigrants or old immigrants, or Olim, that deal with the same situation of identity. So it means that maybe we need to take it out a little bit and see the discussions and the connect relationships, not only inside the community or with the Israeli community and the others. They are part of the Israeli community. They are part of the teenagers, like if we are talking about the teenagers, they grow up in Israel and they're part of other immigrants or Olim teenagers, and I think maybe it can give another point of view, not only like Ethiopia and Israel. Something happened here in Israel and all over the world. Let's say about the asylum seekers situation. What's going on when you are Ethiopian if you are going in the bus stations? You are taking off your clothes from the army and going at Friday evening outside the area of the bus station. So are you identity as by the others? As whom? What's going on when we hear what happened in United States with black teenagers, okay? So it's not only Ethiopia in Israel. These days, I think it's something more bigger, and maybe it can give another idea of research.
Can you say something?
Just, we'll see if you have more questions. Okay, Adi, and then...
I have a question to Ravit. Could you elaborate a bit about the transit of those Ethiopian Jews? What did they do in those camps? How did they live? Because they lived for 20 plus years and they couldn't go out. So, and thank you.
And Elisa?
Thank you. I just have quick questions for the three speakers. First of all, to Professor Metaferia, I was wondering if maybe to continue on Ravit's question or suggestion, have you thought of some of the Ethiopian diasporic youth in the United States? I mean, the Christian Ethiopians, and are there any differences or resemblances between the way they construct their identity, for example, which would follow up what you suggested. The second question to Ravit is, you didn't speak about gender. Is it something that also influences the way people think of time, place, I'm sure, and how waiting affects men or women differently? And the last question for Dr. Wills. Your text was beautiful. It shows that you're a philosopher, for sure, with this phenomenological, almost Heidegger approach. But I was wondering if race is such an important factor, because when you mentioned the problem of citizenship, it's also for Filipinos. There were a lot of Latin Americans here who were mostly expelled. I mean, I'm not so sure race is the only factor here on these questions of citizenship and mixed families, etc.
Okay, please.
A couple of things. One is the whole notion of identity. Identity is something complex. It is like an onion. You peel, you have one identity, you peel another identity. You peel, you are an Israeli. You peel, you are Beta Israeli. And you build also, you are a Middle Easterner. You build, you are a human being. So the way we see identity, our identity, changes according to our environment. I am an Ethiopian, an American citizen, an Ethiopian born in certain parts of Ethiopia. So my identity changed. So identity is a very complex situation. So it changed. It changed. The comparison between racism here and in the Beta Israeli and the situation of Ethiopians in the United States, there are similarities in a way. That's what some of the people also I interviewed said. We identify with them because all over the world, black people are threatened. okay? Whether it is the United States, whether it is Russia, whatever. So this is the universality they are talking about, the people that I talk to. They do have a common quote-unquote enemies that they face, racism. Whether it is racism, whether it is the United States or in Israel or in Russia, it's racism. It defines individuals between us and them. Us, we are superior race, we are civilized. Them, they are always bad people. They are criminals, they are evil. So there is this dichotomy in racism between us and them. That situation is very much universal. The superior class, okay, feels that it is superior. It has authority in everything, okay? And whereas the other people are always inferior, criminal, questionable situation individuals. So there is that similarity in the United States and in Israel as well. One thing I found, it's also a matter of class. Ethiopians have been there for a longer time. Most of them are middle class. They are engineers. They are in NASA and all of this. They do have some time for their kids. But the working class, they don't have time for their kids. They work 2 or 3 jobs. In the case of Falash Mura, I heard that they work 2 or 3 jobs to send money to their parents, to their extended family who are stranded in Addis. So they don't have time for their kids. So they cannot share experiences. They are trying to meet ends, working 2 or 3 jobs. So that situation is based on class. In lower middle class families in Ethiopians in the United States, they don't have time. They don't have time for their kids. Here also, I understand that is a situation where parents work 2 or 3 jobs to send money back to Ethiopia, and they don't have time for their kids. So their kids basically congregate together, and when they congregate together, the police also targets them. They are always questioned. And so this basically I found it to be universal, meaning that it is common in the United States and in Israel as well, as it applies to Ethiopian communities. I hope it answered.
Okay, thank you for your question. Actually, they are waiting, but the question is what they are doing when they are waiting. It started 21 or 23 years ago, so it depends when. Nowadays, it's not similar for like 10 years ago. There is 2 compounds or transit camp, one in Gondar, one in Addis Ababa. It's not a closed place. There is no a border or a gate. They live in a neighborhood. They rent their houses from local people. They pay money every month, of course. I think the question of gender, another question is about generation. What are the differences between generations or ages of people that are waiting, the teenagers and the adults? Most of the adults sitting most of the day and thinking and talking about Israel. They cannot work because they came from the village, and by daily life they are agriculture, and in the city they cannot do actually nothing. So they have practice of waiting, and they are working by this practice. Okay, it means maybe to go to synagogue, to sit with family, to be in relationships with family that already been in Israel, and waiting. The teenagers, some of them going to school. Right now, the Beit Israel school, in Ethiopia, they call Beit Israel. Here it's Falashmua, there is Beit Israel. Their school right now is closed, and all clinic, etc., all organizations close their places over there. So they are going to local school. But before, like 15 years, there was the Israeli Beit Israel school. It means that they went to school until the age 8, study Hebrew and Judaism and some other subjects like math, etc. And some of them went to work. They get money from Israel. All the family send money every month. The teenagers, some of them going to school. Right now, the Beit Israel school, they in Ethiopia, they call Beit Israel. Here it's Falashmua, there is Beit Israel. The school right now is closed, and all clinic, etc., all organizations close their places over there. So they are going to local school. But before, like 15 years, there was the Israeli Beit Israel school. It means that they went to school until the age 8, study Hebrew and Judaism and some other subjects like math, etc. And some of them went to work. they have right now, like I've been there 3 months ago, it is very interesting because they have Bnei Akiva over there, and they have a lot of Israeli teenagers, it's not teenage, after army, like that arrive and they teach them and help them and having fun all together. And they are part of the city, but they are outside of the city. From one point of view, they are doing a lot of activities as waiting. But from the other point of view, they are freezing their daily life. And it's not similar, not to Ethiopia, not to Israel. And of course, there are a lot of NGOs that I didn't talk about them. There is big one like NGO, like NACOJ and other NGOs that part of the years they've been there practically, and some of the years they don't, but they have relationship or connection with the people. So they help them to know what does it mean to be an Israeli citizen. And nowadays we have a lot of family that going back and forth to Ethiopia. So it is another practice or another way to know what does it mean to be in Israel. The border or the gate is not clear. It's like social relationship with the community, the neighbors and the people that live there. I think this is the main issue, the main things what they are doing over there.
Okay, thank you. And David, you just a brief question.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much for offering additional paradigms to kind of conceptualize this project. A few very quick things I want to say that I'm still working with, and they're a little challenging to reconcile. However, a notion of race and nation is something I'm trying to work with because they're also sometimes kind of like synonyms. So the first thing that I wanted to say is when I began to think about this project, one thing that I considered is in most other instances of refugees moving, it's people of racial character or characteristics usually moving into other spaces where they kind of share or can blend in with other people who kind of look similarly. So for example, people in South America moving among South America or even to North America and to the United States can kind of blend in even if they only speak Spanish, though of course language is added complication. Same thing with Turkey into Europe or the Middle East into Europe. They can still kind of, it gets a little, right, Africa within Africa. However, the African refugees is a particular instance where there is an utter discontinuity between the optics of the person who is refugee coming into a place which, with regards to nationality laws, some argue has a complicated relationship to whiteness, which is something that maybe many Ashkenazi Jews, so Sephardic Jews, Ethiopian Jews, experience themselves even while being Jewish. The second thing is I just want to highlight super quickly is that, one thing I'm doing with my project is just pointing out how citizenship is hard for all identities here. So just being, you could be white and heterosexual and of different religions or not Jewish, and being married is complicated. You could be a white same-sex couple, male couple who wants to have a surrogate and you're denied the right to surrogacy. So I agree that there's all these kind of important nuances that however, I think that African refugees highlight a kind of importance with regards to the optics of race. And I was speaking with you both about, we were talking about this together earlier, with regards to the significant presence of Russian people who have overstayed official visa stays. So, and I think that the numbers make me feel like, and I think the experience makes me feel like the African refugees are being targeted in kind of additional ways. And again, kind of highlighting, the lives of Ethiopians here in Israel. There's such a small Black population of even citizens who are barely allowed to be citizens that I think that the African refugees highlight, if Judaism is the term in common, then it seems like the African refugees and the experience of Ethiopians highlight that Israel is really wrestling with and reconciling how it feels about blackness or dark skin, which would apply to, again, like Sephardic Jews as well. However, I really do agree with what you're offering, that the question of like citizenship is, it's fraught along like non-racial terms. But I use Foucault's society must be defended to an extent, and I think race and nation are these kind of weird synonyms at times also. So it's still figuring out what race should mean in the project. Yeah.
Okay, thank you all. It's been a fascinating discussion. And see you next session at 6 o'clock.